Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Gonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 80, and text 18, 19, and 23-22. So text 18 we'll be chanting, at least together. Atam vilokya kyuto durat, tam vilokya yukyuto durat, Priya Paryankam Astita, Priya Paryankam Astitam, Sahasotaya Chapyetya, Sahasotaya Chapyetya, Turbhyam Paryagrahin Muchyam. Actually wrong, Muda. Made a mistake, sorry. Tam Vilokya Chuto Durat, Priya Paryankam Astitam, Sahasotaya Chapyetyam, Dorbhyam Paryagrahin Mudam, Tam Vilokya Chuto Durat, Priya Paryankam Astitam, Sahasotaya Chapyetyam, Dorbhyam Paryagrin Mudam. In the word for word, Tam, him, Vilokya, seeing, Achyuta, Lord Krishna, Durat, at a distance, Priya, of his beloved consort, Paryakam, on the bed, Astita, seated, Sahasa, immediately, Uttaya, rising, Cha, and Abhyetya, coming forward, Dorbhyam, in his arms, Paryagrahit, embraced, Muda, with pleasure. And the translation for text 18 by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. At that time, Lord Achyuta was seated on his consort's bed. Spotting the Brahmana at some distance, the Lord immediately stood up, went forward to meet him, and with great pleasure embraced him. Text 19. There's no purport. Sakyu Priyasya Viprasir Angasangati Nirvitam Pritovyam Munshad Abindun Netrabyam Puskare Kshanaham. In the translation for text 19, the lotus-eyed Supreme Lord felt intense ecstasy upon touching the body of his dear devotee, the wise Brahmana, and thus he shed tears of love. In text 20 through 22, Ato pavesya paryanke svayam sakyu samarhanam upahritya vaniyasya Pado Padavane Jani Agrahik Shira Sarajan Bhagavaloka Pavana Vyalimpati Vyagantena Chandana Guru Kunkamai Dupai Surabibir Mitram Pradipavali Mudam Achitva Vedya Tambulam Gamcha Svagatam Abravit. And the translation for text 20 through 22 is as follows, again by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Lord Krishna seated his friend Sudama upon the bed. Then the Lord, who purifies the whole world, personally offered him various tokens of respect and washed his feet. O king, after which he sprinkled the water on his own head. He anointed him with divinely fragrant sandalwood, a guru, and kumkum paste, and happily worshipped him with aromatic incense and arrays of lamps. After finally offering him betel nut and the gift of a cow, he welcomed him with pleasing words. So no purple for any of the verses. So I'll just do the mantras. Om Gyana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svamrupa Kadamayam Dati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Shahe Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavan Vishwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Panchakalpataribhya Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Padaswami Iti Namine Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll just read text 18 again, although there are 5 verses this morning, but that was the first of our verses that we did together. So the translation for text 18. At that time, Lord Achyuta was seated on his consort's bed. Spotting the Brahmana at some distance, the Lord immediately stood up, went forward to meet him, and with great pleasure embraced him. So naturally, all these verses in this section of the Bhagavatam, the 10th canto, beginning after chapter 13, the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, so it's BBT purports, and this section doesn't have BBT purports, but naturally our acharyas have commented on all of these verses, so I'll be drawing from that. Text 18 is recounted by Srila Prabhupada in a similar manner. This is drawing from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of God, and this is how Srila Prabhupada puts it. So it's, of course, echoing the narration in the Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami, but there's always a little insight that comes from the Acharyas. So here's Srila Prabhupada. At that time, Lord Krishna was sitting on the bedstead of Queen Rukmini. Even from a considerable distance, he could see the Brahmana coming to his home, and he could recognize him as his friend. Lord Krishna immediately left his seat and came forward to receive the Brahmana friend, and upon reaching him, embraced the Brahmana with his 2 arms. Now, similarly, just in reading Srila Prabhupada narrating this section, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he notes one particular thing in this narration, and what he draws attention to is that seeing him, the Brahmana, Krishna got up and went forward, and the word that was used in the verse we chanted was abhyet, where he went into the courtyard of his palace, And there he embraced Sudama in great bliss. So seeing, the getting up, the embracing. So this recognition of his friend, as Krishna is recognizing even from a great distance. I mean, Queen Rukmini was busy fanning him, so it's a whole quiet scenario, and Krishna from a great distance, he's already seen his friend approaching. So this recognition of his friend draws attention to the previous history that was shared between both of them. And Srila Prabhupada describes this past history, because how is it that Krishna is recognizing his friend even from a great distance, and actually a long time had elapsed. So this is the shared history they had. And this, I'm reading from Srila Prabhupada because this is how he describes it. So he begins this way. Brahmachari is supposed to live in a gurukul at the place of the spiritual master, just like a menial servant. Now this is where the story goes, connected to Krishna and Sudama, the Brahmana. His teacher, meaning Krishna's teacher, asked him to bring some fuel from the jungle. And he went with Sudama Vipra. And while collecting these dry woods, there was a storm, and there was heavy rain, and they became lost in the jungle. Krishna and Sudama Vipra. So that's the shared history. This performance of service for their teacher from whom they were learning the Vedas. And they sent out on this mission 2 young boys. And heavy rains come as they're trying to collect dry wood, and they get lost. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada adds, Krishna, then his teacher, Sandipani Muni, with the assistance of other boys, they rescued. So they rescued Krishna and Sudama Vipra. So that's the shared history. Now, Srila Prabhupada makes an interesting observation. And this is the observation that's of significance. He says, Lord Krishna is the reservoir of all transcendental pleasure, yet he felt great pleasure upon embracing the poor Brahmana, because he was meeting his very dear friend. So generally one carries in one's heart the affection one feels towards someone. And especially if it's somebody that's dear to you, you carry that person in your heart. So this is the point that Srila Prabhupada is making, that Krishna felt this great pleasure upon embracing his friend. So there's a wonderful definition that's given Chaitanya Charitamrita in the Adi Leela, text 199, regarding the nature of transcendental pleasure. It's not a regular pleasure. So this is how it's defined what transcendental pleasure is. The happiness of the abode of love is in the happiness of the object of that love. This is not a relationship of desire for personal gratification. So that's the distinction that's been made, and a definition. This transcendental pleasure. So Krishna was not sort of gratifying himself in, oh, you know, it's my personal happiness, my friends come to visit me. It's not like that. Rather, there's happiness that he's thinking to give to his friend, because that's the nature of transcendental pleasure. The happiness lies in the happiness of the object of one's love. So generally, Krishna is the object of everyone's love, but this is the extraordinary part here, how he is experiencing transcendental pleasure. And continuing, and this is in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and I'm going to read it because it's just of relevance, understanding this topic of transcendental pleasure. Whenever there is unselfish love, that is its style. That's how it's put. I think it's quite amazing. The reservoir of love derives pleasure when the lovable object is pleased. So that gives us an understanding why Krishna is experiencing this great transcendental pleasure upon embracing his friend. So Krishna is called the reservoir of love, like all love resides in Krishna. But he's deriving pleasure when he's seeing that Sudama Brahmana is also pleased. So this, of course, generally, this particular section of the Bhagavatam is discussion of the mood of the gopis. But since the definition of transcendental pleasure decries the desire for personal sense gratification, there's an elaboration from the perspective of the servitor, so the one who's serving Krishna. So here's a description. When the pleasure of love interferes with the service of Lord Krishna, the devotee becomes angry with such ecstasy, which is very interesting. And this is how it's described in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Now, of course, this statement paints a picture of those serving Lord Krishna with the example that's given of Daruka. So Daruka, he was fanning Krishna, and he did not relish his ecstatic feelings. He wasn't so happy that he was experiencing this great transcendental pleasure. So because what happened with experiencing the ecstatic feelings, his limbs became stunned. He couldn't move. So that was a problem, because his service was to fan Krishna. So if he was experiencing these ecstatic feelings, he was stunned. So in his case, he was unhappy because this obstructed his service to the fanning of Lord Krishna. So that one understands that the emphasis in the current scenario is on Lord Krishna, the reservoir of transcendental pleasure, to please his servitor and friend, Sudama Brahmana. So that's what the particular focus is here, the emphasis. Krishna is trying to please his friend Sudama Brahmana. So Srila Prabhupada describes how Lord Krishna derived great pleasure from serving Sudama Brahmana. So you get a description of how Krishna is experiencing his transcendental pleasure, and this is how Srila Prabhupada describes it. Lord Krishna had him, meaning Sudama Brahmana, rest on his own bedstead. So it's got to be an intimate relationship. He says to him, you can sit down here. And it's his own bedstead. And he personally brought all kinds of fruits and drinks to offer him, as is proper in receiving a worshipable guest. So naturally, this is a huge palace. There's 16,000 of these palaces. And naturally, there's so many maidservants, but Krishna is personally bringing all kinds of fruits and drinks to offer to Sudama Brahmana. And remember, this was a very poor Brahmana. I mean, he was completely emaciated. He was barely eating. And this is how Krishna was experiencing his transcendental pleasure, just wanting to please the Brahmana. And in text 18 that we read together, this is how it's described. The lotus-eyed Supreme Lord felt intense ecstasy upon touching the body of his dear friend, the wise Brahmana, and thus he shed tears of love. So naturally you can see that this is a special kind of pleasure that's derived, transcendental pleasure. It's not ordinary. I mean, just that he actually touches the body of his friend and that he starts shedding tears of love. It's transcendental happiness. So that's a description given by Srila Prabhupada of how Lord Krishna got great pleasure from serving Sudama Brahmana. Now, something of the extraordinary position of someone who's a dear friend of Lord Krishna is stated by Lord Krishna. Because, you're thinking, what puts somebody in that special kind of position that Krishna is actually going to want to be serving that person, and is actually he himself deriving so much pleasure from pleasing the particular person who's come. So this is something that Krishna says, and it may sound like I'm pulling away from the topic on hand, but it has significance. In Bhagavad Gita 10.3, Krishna says this, and it's something to do what's the position of somebody who's a dear friend of Lord Krishna. And this is how Krishna puts it. He who knows me as the unborn, as the beginningless, as the supreme Lord of all the worlds, he only, undeluded amongst men, is freed from all sins. So this is what puts a person in such a special position for Lord Krishna, that he has that great transcendental pleasure that he's experiencing. It's a very special position of the person. They're carrying this understanding of who Krishna is, that he's unborn, he's beginningless. He's the supreme Lord of all the worlds. The person knows that and understands it deeply. And just because a person carries that understanding means that he's freed from all sins. The person's not carrying any sinful propensity, has no stored sins. It's all completely erased just because the person is carrying that understanding of Lord Krishna. And that's what puts a person in a very special position. And Srila Prabhupada writes this way: one should not try to understand Krishna as a human being. Only a foolish person thinks him to be a human being, because it sounds ordinary. A man who is not foolish, who is intelligent enough, understands the constitutional position of the Godhead and is always freed from sinful reactions. So that's the special position of a person that Krishna is wishing so much to serve. So that same Supreme Lord, or Loka Maheshwaram, is the Lord of all the worlds. He's the supreme proprietor of all the planetary systems. He owns all the planetary systems. Generally, when one is growing up and doing geography classes and is told there's this planet, that planet, the other planet, one never thinks in this way that actually there's an owner of all those planets, and that's Krishna. He's actually the owner of all the proprietor of all the planetary systems of the universe. And he was existing before the creation, and he is different from his creation. So these are all points that Srila Prabhupada brings up to help us to understand the position of Krishna. And all the demigods were created within this material world, but Krishna is not created. So the entities that oversee the functioning of the universe, they were created, but Krishna isn't created. He's beginningless. So he's different from his creation. And in the current scenario, this is what Srila Prabhupada writes: Lord Krishna is the supreme pure. So I always find it very interesting how Srila Prabhupada puts it, to explain the very unique position of Krishna. It's put in capital letters: supreme, pure. So you usually think of pure as like a quality or something that's there, but that it's epitomized, that Krishna represents it. So he's the supreme pure. But because he was playing the role of an ordinary human being, he immediately washed the Brahmana's feet. And for his own purification, he sprinkled the water upon his head. So what an extraordinary thing, that same personality, who's actually the controller of the whole universe, who created the whole universe, who created the beings that oversee the universe, he actually was behaving just like an ordinary human being. Of course, he was in the position of a king, But he immediately washed the Brahmana's feet, and this is how it's written, for his own purification, he sprinkled the water upon his head, because the Brahmana represents a person who's knowledgeable in Vedic culture, who's a worshipper of the Supreme Lord, who has an understanding of the position of the Supreme Lord. So because he's carrying that understanding, when Krishna washes his lotus feet, he takes the water and sprinkles it on his own head. So it's quite an extraordinary description. And after this, the Lord smeared the body of the Brahmana with different kinds of scented pulp, such as sandalwood, aguru, and saffron. He immediately burned several kinds of scented incense, and as is usual, offered him arti with burning lamps. So it's a very interesting thing, the elevated position of Sudama Brahmana. This completely sinless entity that Krishna is actually offering him arti. So he's offering him incense and worshipping him. So Srila Vishwanath draws attention to the following things. So out of that description of Srila Prabhupada, there's one thing that Srila Vishwanath focuses on, and this is what he draws attention to. Krishna sprinkled the water that he used to wash Sudama's feet, pada vane jani, on his head. So it is by virtue of the fact that the Lord was playing the role of a human being that he performed this action. Because generally the sorry, I should put it the yes. You do that because it's not correct. Well, we're reading exactly that. That one pays one's respectful obeisances to an elevated personality. So it would be completely incorrect to be continuing without doing that, because that's precisely what I'm describing. So my opportunity came to act upon what I say. So thank you, Maharaj. Okay. So it is by virtue of the fact that the Lord was playing the role of a human being that he performed this action. So generally, a worldly king is part of the Kshatriya class, that they have to offer respects to the Brahmana, because the Brahmana is considered at the head of society because of the knowledge they're carrying and their purity. And of course, because they're very dear to Krishna by virtue of the fact that they're so sinless. So the actual position of being the supreme pure, because this is the terminology that was used by Srila Prabhupada, is part of a description given of Krishna by Arjuna. So you hear the same kind of description. This is how Arjuna describes Krishna. You are the supreme personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest. All the great sages, such as Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyas, confirm this truth about you. And now you yourself are declaring it to me. So that's Arjuna. So you hear the same understanding of who Krishna is. And particularly, this point that he is actually the purest. So that's the point that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is drawing attention to, that Srila Prabhupada is drawing attention to, the purity of Lord Krishna. So that's from Bhagavad Gita 10:13, and I'll read the verse because it's so significant to this discussion. Purim Brahma Param Dharma Pavitram Paramam Bhavan. Oh, my computer's changed the next word, so I'm not going to try and guess it. Shashvatam Divyam Adidevam Ajam Vibhum. So it's by discharging devotional service that one can understand Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this absolute truth, because everything gets revealed just by performing devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada explains it. In the Vedas, the Supreme Lord is accepted as the purest of the pure. So one who understands that Krishna is the purest of the pure can become purified from all sinful activities. So this is the extraordinary thing. As you come to perform devotional service, there's cleansing that goes on. So one's becoming purified. And then one comes to understand that Krishna is allowing for that purification. So Krishna is the purest of the pure. And just by getting that increased understanding of the purity of Krishna, one is also getting, as Srila Prabhupada uses the word, you're getting disinfected from sinful activities. So it's an interesting thing, because when one is in contact with the modes of material nature, it's like actually getting infected. You're getting infected with desire for sinful activities or performing sinful activities. But just through channeling oneself to perform service to Lord Krishna, there's like a disinfecting that goes on. Those activities are just being cleansed. It goes away. So, because one's gradually surrendering unto the Supreme Lord. And Arjuna's acceptance of Krishna as the Supreme Pure, it's completely in line with the injunctions of the Vedas, because that's what all the Vedic literature says, and that's Srila Prabhupada talking. So this kind of understanding of the Supreme Lord, and this is the last part of the class, if it's been me emphasizing one particular point, hopefully I can bring it together. This kind of understanding of the Supreme Lord as expressed by Arjuna and Srila Prabhupada in speaking of this interaction of Lord Krishna with Sudama Brahmana, it takes place in the Lord's internal potency. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita Adilita, we get this insight. And I found this completely amazing. So I'm going to say it, and hopefully it strikes a chord as well with all of you, because I just think it's amazing. This is what the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adilila text 66 says. The condition of pure goodness, Suddha Sattva, in which the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears uncovered, is called Vasudeva. In that pure state, the Supreme Godhead, who is beyond the material senses and who is known as Vasudeva, is perceived by the mind. So this very interaction that's taking place between Krishna and Sudama, it's actually, Lord Krishna appears completely uncovered. He's naked, so to speak. He's revealing his feelings. He's performing actions that are in a state of pure goodness, Suddha Sattva. So in that pure state, actually one can perceive Krishna by one's mind. And so hence the insights that have come from Srila Prabhupada, the insights that come from Arjuna of the purity of Lord Krishna, this is something that they're able to perceive by their mind, Krishna being completely exposed to them in his purity. So it's a very extraordinary thing that we're getting this, these beautiful commentaries from our acharyas. Even though there's no purport here, one can reference that gives this insight into the uncovered Suddha Sattva, pure goodness nature of Lord Krishna. And this perception by the mind that one can see Krishna in this kind of way that Srila Prabhupada, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have seen him, is achieved through always meditating on Lord Krishna and enjoying one's transcendental relationship with him. Because after all, he's, and this is again Srila Prabhupada with his capital letters, he's the supreme existence. So it's existing on a different plane with the Supreme. And that ability to perceive him in the mind and the purity of Lord Krishna is achieved through performing service and always meditating upon him and enjoying one's transcendental relationship with him. So these are some of the insights that have come on these 5 verses. If there's some thought that's there to add to the discussion or contribute in some way, please feel free.
There's a situation, you're thinking in the position of Sudama Brahmana. He understands Krishna's position. He has that as a pure devotee, and he understands Krishna's position. He can see Krishna's position. And in fact, Krishna is his worshipable Lord. And he goes to see Krishna to fulfill the pledge of his wife, who wants him to ask for Krishna's favor. But he was thinking it's not necessary to go to Krishna to ask for a favor. You know, he's a, he's, he have a relationship that is all in the transcendental plane. So he goes, but nevertheless, he knows Krishna is the supreme. He's worshipful. And then to be in the upper position that your worshipable person is worshiping you is not easy. And you see that many of the passages of Lord Chaitanya, going through the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Recently, I just finished the part in which the Lord meets for the second time Srila Sanatana Goswami in Jagannath Puri. And Sanatana Goswami was so distressed because he was covered with sores, bleeding, and pus from a disease in the skin. And then how can Lord Chaitanya see him in that sort of impure condition? And then he was thinking to commit suicide, to jump into the wheels of the Ratha Yatra. And anyway, Lord Chaitanya see him. Lord Chaitanya, just in despite of Sanatana Goswami's complaint, he will go and embrace him. And Srila Sanatana Goswami was completely mortified about, the situation. I'm impure, and here's the supreme pure embracing me with, and then all the stuff is spreading on his transcendental body. I am the worst. He was feeling terrible, and and so he was hiding and trying to be in the distance, away from Lord Chaitanya, and Lord Chaitanya every time would capture him and embrace him. So he didn't know what to do. So, and then Lord Chaitanya, he was going to commit suicide. That was the solution. And then Lord Chaitanya tells him, no, you can't commit suicide because your body is mine, so you can't destroy the property of someone else. So he has to accept that. So what to do? So then he asked Jaganananda Pandit for advice, and Jaganananda Pandit, just go away, just go to Vrindavan. He told you already to go to Vrindavan. Lord Chaitanya became really angry at Jagadananda Pandit, chastised him, and told Raghunath as Sanatana Goswami, you stay here for 1 year and then embrace him. But when they embrace it this time, his disease disappeared. But the point that I'm making is, this situation that is the supreme and is your worshipful deity, and then he's doing those things to you. He's embracing you, he's worshiping you, he's massaging, so you can see Sudama in that situation, Sudama Brahmana. And so it's remarkable, like our spiritual master likes to show the picture of Krishna and Sudama, Krishna worshiping Sudama, and then he highlights their the eyes in each other, and the tears coming from each other. So if this amazing sense of love between the two, where is it? The awkwardness of being the situation or whatever Krishna is showing by example, as a Kshatriya, all that disappears. And then it's just that connection of love that surpasses all the different apparently external things. So I think it's quite remarkable just to see this exchange that and then Krishna is worshiping him, the awkwardness disappear because of the focus, the whole thing is overwhelmed by the affection between the two of them. And I guess that's the whole thing of rasa. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for doing the parallel description of Lord Chaitanya and Sanatana Goswami, because indeed it was also an embrace that had that same kind of purity, but in that particular case there was the discomfort of the condition of the body on the part of Sanatana Goswami. So in this case, the discomfort that you hear about that's written, it's not in that moment of worship or embrace. The discomfort is on actually even imagining how he's going to reach Krishna. In the previous verses, there's mention how he's thinking, how's he even going to go through the gates? And, because there's troops, it's part of the arrangement, there's troops that are protecting the inner sanctum. So he has to pass through 3 huge gates, and he has to pass through some section of devotees of Lord Krishna, very advanced devotees that apparently nobody else can pass through that area. So he's thinking, how's he even going to do that? So that's where his discomfort lies, that being out of place in that setting. So, or at least that's in this pastime, that's where you hear of some discomfort. And of course, the natural discomfort that his wife had asked him to go and ask for something.
So there's a part that we're going to hear that is really uncomfortable for him when Lord Krishna tells him, what is behind, what is in that bag that you brought me something. I mean, he was horrified. How in the world he was going to give him that cheap, that poha to Krishna,
Yes.
And then Krishna snatched it. He was horrified.
Yeah, so there is still that discomfort level of the discrepancy. I mean, he's just been offered every kind of fruit, every kind of drink, Krishna personally bringing them, and the contrast that he has his little bag of something that was begged for, yes. So it's quite extraordinary. But it highlights this particular point of that it's all taking place within the internal potency of Lord Krishna. So the real thing is the connection of love. And you highlighted and pointed to that, and exactly that was the point of this extraordinary description of Lord Krishna worshipping his devotee. Thank you.
I have just studied that the position of Sudama. Recently, we studied Sudama is actually using Prakasa Vaibhava form of Krishna. Prakasa Vaibhava is in that category, Sudama.
And do you wish to define that since you're making a statement?
Yeah, that is what I said. The Guru Govinda Maharaj has stated that he is in category of Bhava Vaibhava. Whereas Balaram is in Prabhava Prakasa and Sudama in Prabhava Bhava.
So can you explain? Can you
Oh yeah,
define what the Prakash?
yeah, you know, Prabhava Prakasa, Prabhava Bhava means they are like a empowered incarnation of Krishna. Empower.
Yes, understood.
Probably it is like a Saktavasa. Sakta, we say Prabhupada is Saktavasa avatar, like the empower incarnate. So
Okay.
like that. So same way Sudama is.
Okay. So the comment that was passed, if it wasn't heard well, was that Sudama Brahmana falls into the category of being an empowered incarnation of Lord Krishna. Yes, I didn't come across that in the Acharya's commentary on this section. But, and I don't know where your source is. You would have to tell me where your source is so that we can look it up, because it's necessary to have the source. But thank you for your contribution.
Prabhava Prakash and then Vaibhava Prakash. Right. I have to look at that. I remember reading the Prabhava Prakash and Vaibhava Prakash. That's a
All right. Thank you very, very much for your kind contribution. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. And thank you for your attendance in the class.